So today we're going to cover deployment, presentation, and visualization in data science. So let's talk about operationalization. So as you remember, there's a data analytics lifecycle. So the first step is discovery. You did that, data preparation, model planning, and model building. So we covered step 1 to 4 already. Now we want to know that once we build a model, we evaluated it, and we kind of found a model that seems to be suitable for word use. Then you need to start communicating the results to the project sponsors, people who asked you to do that project, and prepare to operationalize. So these steps are important steps. For example, after you created your model, you want to ask some questions from yourself. Is the model that I've built robust enough? Has it failed in any way? If it is not robust enough, you need to go back to your model planning, even data preparation, and try to make it more robust. Has it failed in any way? Is there anything that you could change? Is it not working for a specific class? So you need to go ahead and try to work with your model to make sure that your model is a good model. So once you have that, once you're sure that you have a robust model and it's the best model that you could build, then you want to go ahead and try to communicate the results to the people, the stakeholders of the company. So what you need to think of, the answer that you need to question is what is the best way to integrate the solutions with the sales or marketing. So the solution that you're going to provide is going to help actual people gain more customers, actual people to kind of lower the cost. So whatever you're going to do, the whole project, the main goal of your project, whatever you need to do, it should make sense to executives. It should make sense. It should make sense to people who are actually going to use that software. So that part is a key part, and then after that, you need to operationalize. When you want to do that, what you need to do at that stage is that you need to do anything necessary for your program to run without interruption. So there's usually a place, there's a production group in each company that deals with that part. But this is a new process that your team is the expert of that. So you need to go ahead and help those people to run your code, to make it operationalize. And what you need to also do at that level is that you need to check how your code is actually performing. So is your model performing well when you actually test it with real code? So during the model building, what you did was that you had a data set, right? So you had a data set and you divided it into 2 or 3 sets. Maybe there is a training, there is the validation, and there is the testing. So this is the data that you had. So once you've done building your model, then your model after that in this level, so you use that to create your model. Then this model will be used in real world, and in a real world scenario, what happens is that new data will be entered to your model, and that new data is actually an unseen data. That unseen data probably has a different distribution than the data that you collected as part of your model. For example, in the coronavirus pandemic, before that, all the data, time series, everything makes sense in another way. You created your model based on the fact that everything is good, businesses are running, all that. But now suddenly, in a matter of a month, now that you want to actually use your software, use your model, all the data is changed. The market is down. No businesses are running. A lot of people want, I don't know, loan deferrals. So all these problems could occur when between the time that you try to build your model and the time that you want to operationalize it. And even when you do that, when you operationalize, you need to keep track of all the changes that happens, because new data, new situations, all that, it's usually creates some unexpected results for your project. So you need to really think of that. So all in all, when you deal with this, when you work in this data analytics lifecycle, once you operationalize, then you could say that, well, the version 1 of my solution is done. And then if you want to do more, if you want to, when you start monitoring it and making it better, some of those features will need to go through this cycle again. If there's a new feature that you want to add, you want to go to the discovery phase, data preparation phase, model planning phase, and so on. So now we want to talk in this chapter, we want to focus on these two, and how you could communicate the results and how you can operationalize. So when you're done with your project, in terms of building your model, there are a few steps that you need to do. First, your team, which is the project team, the team that worked on the data, on gathering, cleaning, and munging the data, what you have achieved so far is that you have created the best model ever. So this best model ever is something that you need to work hard on to develop. So if you got some results, it's not the end of the the step. You need to work on it. You need to fix any problems that you have. So one goal that you have is to build the best model that you can build in the time being. So once you build that model, everyone is going to say, wow, good, so we created a good model, we have something to do, but you're not done yet. You need to first communicate the results to the various stakeholders outside of the project team. So your team did something good, you need to convince people. You need to convince people that your model has a very high business value. So if your model has a good business value, for whom? For the stakeholders, for people in the company, for whoever is going to use your application software. It is very important that you demonstrate the business value. No one says you haven't done a lot of work, you haven't done a great job, but sometimes you spend a lot of time on a project, but it doesn't add anything to the business. It doesn't have any business value. It might be very expensive to implement while giving just a low value. So overall, it may not be the best option. So while you're doing that, there are a lot of people that are going to criticize your work. And they are going to say, well, this is not going to work. It's too much work. We don't have time, blah, blah, blah. So you need to address the concerns of those people with numbers, with diagrams, with anything that you could use to communicate that information. Only if your work is put into the production, then your project is something that can add value to the business. Otherwise, it's going to be another model that sits in different people's hard drives that was never used. So now assume that you communicated very well, and then there's a project approval that is granted to your project. So someone says, okay, good, it looks promising, we want that, it's a good business value, let's put it into production. Then you need to be ready for that. So who is going to put the model into production? So what it means is that who is going to take care of the model to be used in a daily basis, in real time, somewhere as a dashboard or maybe a website? Is it going to be the same project team? You guys are going to do that, or is it going to be a different team? Who is responsible for that? Who is going to implement the model? You may have implemented your model in Python and you showed that it works, but Python may not be the best option. It may be a little bit slow for real-time applications. So you may need to re-implement that in another language, because the model, the scenario, everything is going to be the same, right? The only difference is that, so now that you've proved that you have a good model, then you need to make it operationalized in the fastest way possible. I remember that when I was just working on my master's project, so I mentioned that to you before. So I had 54,000 images, and I was using C# image class, and processing all those for my in my computer, which was a good Core i7 computer, was taking around 50 minutes. But that was just for one epoch. I wasn't even using neural networks, but just one pass over all the images. So just by changing the class, the library, from that to emgucv, which is the C# version of OpenCV. By changing that library, and I use that emgucv image. And I changed a few places. I looked at my code. That 50 minutes turned into 8 minutes. So that is a huge difference. So sometimes you need to use another library. You need to implement your language your model in another language in order for it to be used effectively. So while you're thinking about that, scenario, you need to think about whether you need new resources. Do you need a new developer? Do you need someone that could help you? Do you need a network or data architect? What do you need? So you need to think about those if you cannot implement the model yourself, or you're not allowed to do that. So once you have thought about that, what needs to be done, then the next step would be to communicate those results and your plan effectively to the people, the stakeholders. You do not need to wait until the model is built. So while you're working on your model, while you have some questions, while you're gathering the data, you need to go ahead and think about the fact that, well, am I on the right path? So is it what the stakeholders are looking for? So periodically keep stakeholders aware of the project objectives and status. So what's happening? What is the results? What are the objectives? So that you know that you're on track. And because some people may not know that your team is even working on that project. So you need to make sure that everyone is aware and there are no surprises at the end. So another step, like in communicating the results, is that you need to tailor your results to the audience. What it means is that there usually, as you remember, there are two different type of people. There's the business people, business process, business users, and there are technical users. So the business users, they usually care about how their process is actually impacted, favorably or negatively. What does that mean? So business process is actually the way people do things in a business. So if previously someone had to deal directly with the customer, and now because of any reason they cannot do that, and they have to do anything like their process remotely, and there's an additional step that they should log into your software, get the data from there, anything. how is that going to affect their daily business process? So this is something that you should communicate very well, because a lot of people do not like change. Okay, so if someone is comfortable doing something even in an ineffective way, it's not easy to sell them a new way, because change is hard for people, especially non-technical people. So if this course has been a difficult course for a lot of you who have technical experience and studying a master's in computer science, then how do you expect people with no background in programming or maybe websites or cloud to embrace your idea, embrace your solutions, and to actually try to use that with open arms? So you need to make sure that you clearly define their new process, how things are going to be better for them, and how negatively some of the things could affect their process. On the other hand, technical users, they need detailed information about data sources, the code, and requirements. So again, they need detailed information about the data sources. Where is your data coming from? What is the format? Everything. They need the code and the requirements. How can I run that? What is the code? Where is the code? So again, this is very important that you have kind of two separate communication package for business and technical users. So for the business users, you want to again talk about the outcomes, the value, not the technical, not how good you use that, how much you know about deep learning. They don't care, right? What they care about is how their business is actually going to be affected, whether it has a positive business value or a negative one. In order to know that, you need to get the experience of others. So there are other people who may have presented the same something similar to the same executives. You could get the help from them. If another student came and talked to your professor, and the professor mentioned something to them about how he expects the project to be, then it's not a bad idea to talk with them to know the expectation of this specific professor. It's the same thing as it is in a business. So some people have a certain way of doing business, the same expectations. So it's good to get something from the to help of the other, and also try to get some feedbacks and from people in that organization to know how you need to deal with that. While you're thinking about communication and actually operationalizing, you need to think very early, as soon as possible, about some of the roadblocks that you may have. For example, what are these fiscal constraints? Some people need a project to be done by end of the December. If it's cannot be used by end of December, at the end of the fiscal year, well, you need to wait another 12 months for it to be usable. There are some fiscal years, for example, the University of Regina fiscal year is end of April. Okay, and everything new fiscal year begins in May. So whatever you want to do, you want to make sure that if they are looking for a project that involves financial data, you need to start thinking about testing it way before the end of the fiscal year, so that it can actually be piloted for one fiscal year and then used for the next year. So what are the hardware, software, and personal resources? You need to think about this. For hardware, where is your code going to run? Where is it? Is it on the cloud? Is it on premises? What do you need? Is it a big deep learning software that I don't know, model that needs a lot of like big CPUs and GPUs to run? What is the software? Have you used MATLAB or any other software that you need to buy licenses for? Personnel, is there, like, when you're gone, you've done your work and you're gone, who is going to maintain it? Who is going to fix the problems? Who is going to work on that? Do you need someone to actually, is someone needs to be hired to continue maintaining your software? And something that is very important is the conflicting projects and their schedules. So there are some people, there are some projects that have higher priority, and you can see how fast priorities can change, and how fast schedules of people are changed completely. So I'm talking about the example of the coronavirus, of how businesses close, airlines bankrupt, people get laid off, So things like that could happen very fast. So if you're expecting something to happen in the future, you need to consider that. If a president of the university is leaving in 6 months, so you may not have the support of that person anymore. If your sponsor is leaving the company, if you are leaving the company. So these are some of the things that you need to consider. So in general, what the package that you're going to prepare should have 4 core deliverables. So these 4 core deliverables are the presentation for project sponsors and other executives. So you need that high-level kind of presentation. And then you need the presentation for analysts, so for technical users. So these are two presentations that you need to create, right? Then the other deliverables is your code and specifications and documentations for implementing the code. So you need to provide a clean documented code and the technical specifications, how to implement that code. It's not just, okay, this is my code, go ahead and run it. Well, you may have installed a lot of libraries in your computer. You may use a specific system. Someone is using Linux, someone is using Mac, someone is using Android or Windows. So how do you expect that people have the same computer, same libraries installed, same kind of technical expertise as you? So if it has not been trivial for you to learn, it's definitely not trivial for a lot of other people. Maybe there are some people who know more than you, and they exist, and they are the people that are going to probably implement your code. So that's fine, that's good news. But again, those people, they do not have a crystal ball, or they do not have unlimited knowledge to know what's happening in your head, or what libraries have you installed in your computer. So you need to specifically provide the requirements of how to implement the code. So for these presentations, for the first part, when you're creating the presentation for project sponsors, what you need to have in mind is that you want to identify the big picture takeaways. Don't go into details. What is the big picture? Create a very high-level diagram that talks about the fact that, well, this is your model, this is the data, right? So data was going to a person that was dealing with that first and was getting the results. Now the data is going to your model, and then it is going to a dashboard. And now this person is actually going to use that dashboard to create that result. So in a very high level diagram, explain what is the big picture, what is happening. Usually these are very important. Also, when you're talking about business value, you need to use diagrams. So what was the so if this is the revenue of the company, and it was like this, right? If you need to convince those people that if they start using, if they have started using your software, then their revenue would have been something like this, you know. So this is your model. This is their current business process. So they have what's the current business process. Sometimes they call that as is. So whatever as the current state as is, what's happening, and then there's a 2B, which is the state, the next state that you've designed. So what is the difference between the as is and the 2B? So you need to clarify that. You need to provide this information to your users. So basically, once you've created that, identified that big picture, why you're doing this project, then you need to identify the key messages that they can use to actually make a decision. So you need to give them something. You need to tell them this story. You need to tell them that, okay, the key message is that in 1 year after deploying your project, they're going to have 20% higher revenue. Okay, so that's a key message. This model gives you 20% higher revenue in 1 year. Well, that's something that they like. While maybe it costs something, right? So what is the value? What is the cost? You need to make sure everything is clear. Again, focus on clean, easy visuals for the presenter, because you don't want anything complicated. You want something very clean and simple and concise. Again, the objective of your presentation is demonstrating a business benefit, not how good your code looks like or how cool the latest deep learning TensorFlow 2 or 3 is in the current, I don't know, internet environment. So they don't know about this. They don't care. They want to know what is the business benefit of your implementation is. So now when you want to present for the analyst, it's a little bit different. So when you're presenting for analyst, they want to make sure that your model is correct, that your assumptions are correct. So first, you need to make sure that you are identifying the changes that are happening to their business process. So the way they were doing the things yesterday is now different. It's going to change in different ways. You need to write, maybe provide them with some documentations of the new business process model. How reporting is changed. Who is now, like in this example that we have here, previously the user was providing the results directly. Now the user is going to work with that computer, and maybe now this report is going to be emailed directly to the CEO. But previously, this person was delivering a printed version of the result or an Excel result as an just maybe in a very old-fashioned way to the CEO. So you need to make sure that you communicate these changes very effectively. People, data scientists, there are a lot of people who are going to criticize your work. So you need to be ready for that. They want details, and they are comfortable with technical graphs. So you need to provide them RC curves, confusion matrices, like hypothesis, different like t-test results, box whisker diagrams. So you can expect that you can deliver these to technical analysts. And they should be part of your presentation. So the objective here is completely different. So here you want to demonstrate the business benefit of the model. Here you want to demonstrate the validity of the model. You want to defend your model. If someone asks, well, are you sure that your data is, that your variables are independent of each other? Because it seems like you've used naive Bayes, and but have you checked for the correlation between your variables? Well, if you have not checked that, if you're not sure about that, if you don't have anything to defend that, then the validity of your model and your approach will be questioned. It seems like maybe you do not know what you're doing. So you don't want that to happen. So you need to make sure that actually what you've done has a correct path. And one way to do that is to have multiple presentations for them, maybe while you're creating your model, to be in touch with them, so that if there's a problem, you can catch it early on, because it's often too late to wait for the last presentation to just offer your model and presentation. So the next step is the code and technical specifications. So for that documentation and code, you want to make sure that you're going to provide well-documented code. Documentation is not easy to write. It's a skill and it takes a lot of time. So make sure you take that time and document your code very well with meaningful variable names. If you your code, like you've chosen some variables that, well, you're not so proud of, you can use IDEs like Visual Studio or other IDEs that can help you with renaming those variables effectively. They can even, like in Visual Studio, for example, I don't know if I have that, maybe I show that to you later. If you have a variable, you could right click and click rename, and it goes and looks everywhere in your code that you have used that variable, and even in your comments. If you have some documentation, you wrote a lot of documentations and you say, oh, I've used this incorrect variable name in my documentation, and going to take, I don't know, like 3 hours to go and check for all the places that I've used that, and it's going to be cumbersome. That's correct, but you don't need to do that. You could use find and replace. You could use the tools that you have. There is no excuse to not to use a meaningful variable name. And if someone says, okay, I'm very comfortable with just using a notepad, I want to practice working in a notepad, I don't want to use any IDEs, well, you are going to waste a lot of time by not using those IDEs. That it's not worth it. So that valuable time can be used in other ways. If you are being paid in a company, and if it takes for you to change all your variable names in 30 seconds using an IDE, and 2 hours without using an IDE because you think that's a cooler approach, then I don't think you're going to stay in that company for a long time, because efficiency is very important. And make sure you understand and use the tools that are available to you. The IDEs are very good tools that you could use, and there are a lot of ways that you could provide documentation. So when you write, for example, in Python, if you have a variable like, so I give the example in C++, but it's the same with Python. So if you have a function, and this is your function, so in your function, you may have like I just write it in general. You have a function, I don't know, f. It's not C++ anymore. So there's a function f with input x and input y. Okay. So one way to document this is that if you create, there are some conventions. If you create start your documentation with that there, you could even like depending on your program language, there are some ways you could do that. These are called XML documentations. Then you could talk about what your function does, and then you could say what each parameter means. So one parameter x, then description of that, another parameter y, description of that. So if you write your documentation like this, there is a I think library called Doxygen. I quickly go and check that out. Doxygen, yep. So for example, if you come and use the Doxygen, there's a manual for you to use, and it tells you how to write documentation for Python, C, etc. Then it can generate an online documentation for you in HTML format. So this documentation, like there, if you go and try to read about the examples, okay, now that's we're someplace else. So okay, so if you search C++ functions comments, and if you click on the first link that comes, you will see here a few boilerplates. For example, if you start your documentation with that and end with that and use parameters, there's a value, what's happening there, what is the return value of your kind of function. When you do something like that, then what happens is that I can show you an example. So this is an example of a simple C++ program. And for even a very simple function like calculating the sum of two integers, you can document it like this. This is a proper documentation. So the reason that you need to use a specific format is that there are some tools that generate documentation out of your code as well. So in this case, so there is some title for that format, and there are three arguments, parameters here. And for each parameter, you can summarize what those parameters are doing. In this case, there is only one parameter. Here we have two. Whether this function is going to return something, what that parameter actually mean. And not only when you do that, you can actually write your code very faster, but also if you use a tool like Doxygen, it will create an HTML file for you for just even that one single file. Based on it reads that file and it generates, okay, what are different functions, what are the different variables. You could click on a specific function like this calculate the sum, and look, you can see here that all this documentation, very well formatted in HTML format, is created because you look at these parameters here, in, out, the same way that you have put everything, because you have used a specific template that is understandable. This is called an XML kind of template that parsers, some documentation tools can use that and actually generate a very, very well documentation for your code. So your documentation should stay in your code. However, it is also very useful to generate something like this so that people could go over and validate your code. So in general, documentation is Very important. So make sure that you document your project very well. It is not for other people, it's for you as well. Because if you have experienced that you write something and after a few maybe weeks you come back and you totally forgot what you have written. Um, so that's about documentation. Another thing that is important for you is to describe the input elements and sources. So your data sources, where did you get them? What are the problems? How you can use that? Is there any licensing? What if you have captured your live data? What was the environment that you used? What was the camera that you used? What is the specification of that? Where did you do any pre-processing? Did you have any pre-processing? If you're taking some photos of, I don't know, some grocery or something for your code, you need to also have some photos of the setup. So this is the setup, the plate that I used to put the, I don't know, bulk grocery was 10 centimeters. The camera that I used was this generation of iPhone or maybe Android. This is the setting on the camera. So you need to make sure that the data formats, associated units, everything is documented. And you need to describe any pre-processing step that you've done. So that is about the data and how it can be accessed. And then try to explain the model processing. How is going to how does it process? How is your model different maybe from other models? Identify possible error situations. For example, if you have missing data, how did you handle it? If there are any missing data, how other people can handle that? Is there any default conditions that they need to set, like all this information? Then tell them how they can interpret and apply the model outputs. So what is the result output of your model? Is it an index? What is that? What does that index mean? Is it maybe yeah, like if it is a matrix, what does it mean? Is there any limitations? How they can interpret? If it is a number, it's a percentage, it's a number between 0 and 1. What is that? Is it a probability or is it a pseudo probability? Or what is it actually? So you need to make sure that you describe the way people can interpret your model output. And you need to address the need to easily update the model. Because, again, new data comes in, new situations, new seasons, new pandemics. So you need to identify what is going to change over the time in your model and how that can be implemented. For example, is there a, I don't know, coefficient variable, new data that you need to add? If there are different, I don't know, scenarios that they have to use, their hyperparameters that they have to set. If they have a lot of new data, then maybe they need to retrain your whole model. So you need to think about all those before and document that. So finally, when you done with that communication, you provided the code, technical reports and everything, and presented your model to the stakeholders and technical people, then you need to operationalize. So when you want to operationalize, you need to maybe onboard new team members. In a group project, that may mean that some specific people in your team were those who were more, they had more technical skills, and now it's their time to go ahead and try to implement that whole model and try to operationalize it. So when you want to do that, you need to describe the business situation and the benefits of the project so that they understand that. You need to share your technical documentation for them. No one can, well, it's not easy to implement your model if they don't have the code. So think about that. Like if you want to, you need to think from the start that, well, someday I need to share my code with some people. whether it is under an NDA, non-disclosure of information, or maybe it's in a private repository, or somehow you need to, if you wanted to operationalize, you need to work with other people. Just your idea, you spend a lot of time writing your code, but again, it's your code, and this is your intellectual property. So think carefully how you want to deliver that documentation. So yeah, putting the code on GitHub, if you don't really care about that, and that's not a bad idea. It's easier for you to, it's just a simple drag and drop. If you haven't started your code on GitHub already, then once you're kind of finished, you could put it there, put requirements, document it a little bit, so that some other people may find it useful, or for yourself, if you wanted to share with other people, it's not that hard, and you have it back up there. So once you do that, once you found new people, you need to run a pilot. So what does it mean? So like you need to create a pilot project, a demo project. Like you need to try to prepare everything and just create a sample demo of your project with the actual model and actual data. So when you create that and show it to people, it demonstrates the value that you were thinking. So always a demo is a great thing. So with your projects, try to prepare a demo in a way that the actual user is going to use it. Even though if it's not something complicated, something that is like very usable. If your work project, some of your projects are based on a full operationalization and a full software product, like a website at the end, especially those with 3 team members. For others, even if you're just a single team member, you need to create a pilot, like a simple web page or something, to demonstrate the value and the way your system is going to be used. Okay, if it's a dashboard, anything. And while you're running that pilot, ensure that no unforeseen issues arise. So that's a test bed, like your beta software release, that you're going to use that to make sure that all the issues are addressed and handled. Once you've run that pilot, then you go ahead and fully implement the model in the production environment. So mostly in the real case scenarios, not maybe completing your course, because what you create is mostly a pilot. And again, if you have an app, you can publish it to app stores, get it licensed. It's not very difficult. And also, if it's a real-time scenario, it's going to be very complicated as well. I think one of the biggest issues is operationalization is sometimes very difficult in some companies. So that could take from a few months to a few years. Sometimes it's very fast. Sometimes they can set something up for you within a day. So again, it varies a lot. So expect a lot of unexpected. Define the process you will use to monitor, return, and update the model. Again, this is important. What is the process if they want to update the model? If I give you new data, if there's a new scenario, if there's new data coming and your data is not trained based on them, what is your plan? How can they do that? What is the process? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Get the model, train it, and do something like that. So define those processes and make sure to document everything. Then test your model, test it yourself and with other team members. So basically, that's the full cycle, and that's the kind of everything that you needed to do. Next step, we talk about the presentations and also visualizations, how you could make a better form of that.